Hi, my name is Jakub Sokolowski, and I am an economist at the Institute of Structural Research in Poland, and also an assistant professor at the University of Warsaw. And at the Institute, we have been researching energy poverty in Poland and Central Eastern Europe um, since 2015. And today, I will try to briefly um, explain our experiences about energy poverty measuring, monitoring, and identification. Uh, of course, I would like to thank Energy Poverty Advisory Hub for this invitation, and I hope that um, the participants of the intensive course will find the presentation useful in their work. So, first of all, I would like to focus on the right choice of methods in order to match your research question, match the hypothesis you want to test in your research. This is crucial, and we have learned from our experience that usually you have to separate the measurement, monitoring, and identification, because in order to have efficient measurement, monitoring, and identification, you will have to use different types of methods and different data sources. So starting from measurement, which basically answers the question how many people in a given country or a given region are suffering from energy poverty, usually the best approach is to use the data from the statistical office that operates in your particular country, or you can use pan-European data that is provided by the Eurostat. What is the purpose of using this data, of answering this question? It basically tells you about measuring and monitoring. So it tells you about the scale of energy poverty in a given country or region, and it helps you evaluate, for example, the efficiency of support measures, because you can monitor the changes of the scale of energy poverty over time. How you should approach answering this question, or accomplishing the task of measuring and monitoring. Basically, you should follow the well-established methods and indicators, and use the data that is suggested by, for example, the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub. So this is probably the best idea. They have spent a lot of energy and effort on evaluating the indicators. So basically, you can follow their work and experience, and you don't have to do it on your own. And basically, your task will be in matching the indicators to the data that is available in your statistical office. Based on the Polish example, and I think it's quite representative for the other countries as well, it should give you information about the regions, and I mean by this, I mean NUTS 2 regions, and sometimes even the biggest cities in your particular country. And the key advantage here is that it can be done at a very low cost, because the access to the data is quite cheap. On the other hand, if you want to answer a bit more, let's say, practical question in terms of the possibility to implement support measures, especially those support measures that are targeted to decreasing the scale of energy poverty, because we have to understand that there are some measures that will help people suffering from energy poverty with, for example, covering their bills, which are more short-term measures like monetary transfers. And there are the long-term measures like helping them invest in energy efficiency improvements. But still, in order to identify those people, you should be able to answer the question, who are the people that require assistance because they are suffering from energy poverty? My advice from our experience would be to use the administrative data sets, because both the statistical office data and the survey data, which I am going to cover in a moment, are anonymous. Of course, the administrative data is also anonymous, but it allows you to disaggregate the data to much precise level, sometimes even street level data. So it should help you identify not maybe people, but for example, districts or even buildings that require immediate assistance. So this identification should be helpful. Of course, the administration have more access to more data. So if they want to target particular people, they can ask for their incomes. Of course, we strongly advise that this data should also be anonymous. So the researchers should not have any access to any details about people receiving the help. Still, the work on administrative data requires a combination of a research partner and administration partner. So as I said, for example, the split between who knows what about particular citizens of a given city or municipality, it's always best to separate it, and it's always best to work on completely anonymous data. But still, researchers, and I will give you a very practical example of that, can identify areas of that require immediate intervention. This can be done on a grid of 1 by 1 kilometer, for example, this X by X kilometer, depending on the quality of data. The cost, I would say, is medium, as it requires the access to administrative data that is already there. So, for example, the energy spending, energy requirements of particular buildings, you can get this, you can access this from the administrative data sets. Of course, there is some cost in order to employ the models and to curate the data. So I can't say it's comparable to the cheapest statistical office data sources. And finally, we have the survey data. Usually people think of survey data as an opportunity to answer those two previous questions, which is measuring and monitoring or identification. I strongly advise that you think of survey data as a source that can help you characterize the traits of the people that suffer from energy poverty. And for example, if you have some additional research questions that cannot be answered, you have some hypotheses that you want to test that cannot be answered with administrative data or the data from statistical office, you can employ survey data. You can base your research on survey data. And again, I will give you a very concrete example of that. But remember that our experience shows that for measuring and monitoring and identification, either the data from statistical office or administrative data serves better. It's still the survey data, it requires a local partner to collect the information. It's going to be anonymous again, so it cannot serve you for identification. Usually it will be on a municipality level, and usually it has a high cost. and sometimes there are difficulties because your research partner might not use the best methods. They might just use the methods that they can use, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the best method there is. So you have to be very careful, and for example your result might not be comparable. So for some reason, due to the particular indicators your research partner is using, the scale of energy poverty in your particular municipality, for example, might differ a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have some issues in your municipality with energy poverty. It might mean that your research partner is not using the best possible methods because maybe they are not familiar with work of energy poverty advisory hub. Okay, so showing very concrete example of applying those methods, I will start with statistical data. So what we have done, and we have tried a different combination for Poland, but what we have done, we have used the data provided by Polish Statistical Office, and we have combined single indicators. Some of them also you can find in Energy Poverty Advisory Hub manuals, in order to create a single multidimensional energy poverty index. Why we did so? Because we saw that when you operate on multiple indicators, which is good to characterize the people that are suffering from energy poverty in more detail and better, to have those subjective and objective indicators based on income, expenditures, based on housing conditions, and so on. When we did so and we presented policymakers with a couple of those indicators, they were confused. They didn't know which one is better, if we can even say that some of them are superior or not. So we thought that maybe what will help them in order to plan intervention and prioritize help would be to build a multidimensional energy poverty index that will return one single statistic that will combine all those indicators. So this is what we did. We understand that there are advantages and disadvantages of this approach as well. We discussed them in our article that you can find referenced in this slide for more details. But basically, this is just a matrix of deprivations, and you want to see on a level of one household how many of those deprivations are present in one particular household. And you can see that we can also disaggregate this information to the regions of Poland and see which regions are particularly at risk of energy poverty. And again, we can return this one number, which for 2021 was about 1.5 million of households that were suffering from multidimensional energy poverty in Poland. Going further, this is based on survey data. What you should do is you should try to connect some regional local characteristics with another important issue that might be related to energy poverty. In our case, it was health. So we wanted to see how energy poverty, we wanted to test the hypothesis that energy poverty relates to poor health outcomes. And we did that. To this purpose, we used a survey that we designed and commissioned in two municipalities, two cities in Poland, located in one particular municipality. And we have actually found out that there is a relation between energy poverty, poor heating sources or inefficient heating sources and inefficient fuels, and energy poverty. Again, all the details are referenced in our article that we were able to publish, but my suggestion is use survey data to relate it to some other bigger issue that you want to test. It might be health, it might be living conditions, it might be some kind of comfort, it might be anything, labor market outcomes, whatever you find important to test. This is, I think, better use of survey data than using it for measuring, monitoring, or identification. And going to the last example, I put the administrative data at the end because this is the most fresh approach that we have. We started testing. We will start even testing in November. This is the approach that we are going to use in the Locati project, a live Locati project that's going to be based on administrative data. So our project, we will basically combine a lot of indicators of energy poverty and energy efficiency in order to identify people suffering from energy poverty or living in energy inefficient buildings, again to prioritize support. So our approach is basically to, again, based on the administrative data. Of course, sometimes if the administrative data will not tell us everything that we need to know, we will combine this information with national data sets as well. But basically, what we want to do is to match the characteristics of some model buildings and, let's say, model inhabitants that have particular traits, particular characteristics with particular inhabitants and particular buildings in a given municipality. And based on this matching, we want to compare the model building energy use and model inhabitant energy spending with the particular buildings energy use and particular inhabitants energy spending. This will give us an overview if in our municipality we have buildings and inhabitants who are spending too much on energy and buildings that are using too much energy, or maybe the other way around, that there are people who are underspending and buildings that are underusing energy for some reason. With the help of administration, we will map those areas where those buildings and people are particularly present, and we want to construct a grid of areas that require the most immediate intervention, and this will be the task of the administration to check on ground if it's actually the case. So it will be a combination of research, administrative data, and administrative support to create those maps or mappings maybe of intervention. We will start in pilot municipalities in pilot countries, but hopefully we are going to extend our approach further. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you will find all the information useful, and feel free to reach out to me with further questions. Thank you.